Legal Survival, the podcast where you learn tips, tricks, and secrets about what works in buying and selling businesses. Our team of a couple of lawyers and one non-lawyer will give you the tools to build your perfect escape. Here's the team to make it all happen for you in mergers and acquisitions. And we're not billing you in 6-minute increments for listening.
Hey everybody, welcome to Legal Survival. It's Bart Dalton here from Continuum Corporate Lawyers. I'm here with Andrew Ward and Callum Gillicker, and today we're going to talk about property extraction. Woo! Lots of fun. We're going to try to keep it light, airy, but we're make sure that we give you some tidbits, some ideas around taking property out of the deals, because if you listen to our 4.5 P's that kill deals, property was one of those, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm, exactly.
And so we're going to talk today because over the last 5 deals we've done, 4 of them have had property extractions. So we've come up with some ways that you might already know, some things you might have already thought about, but we're really going to just, Callum, when it comes down to it, if a property is involved, what are some of the things we need to think about that aren't the in-depth ones, but things we should talk about with the clients before we even start?
Well, I think one of the main things that needs to be discussed at the beginning is exactly what is the intention for that property. So the point here is that the property is owned by the company. The buyer's come in, has a suggestive offer for buying the company for this business as a going concern, but the property is there. Now, is it a property that the buyer doesn't actually want? It doesn't really necessarily fit into what the company does. For example, it might be a residential property. It might simply just not be needed going forwards as far as the buyer's plans go. So conversations need to be had about what happens there. And is it extracted, really? And
sometimes the buyer makes an assumption that the seller makes an assumption that the buyer actually wants that property, doesn't?
Yeah, so sometimes you'll find that they've bought the property, the company's got a bit of free cash, decides to invest in some property, and then the buyer comes along and says, no, we don't want it, because actually what they're buying is the business itself. They're not there to buy the property.
Yeah, because they might have the facilities, they might already have manufacturing, they might already have a warehouse or even an office space that they're going to be using, and they're trying to reduce overheads, aren't they?
Yeah, a lot of the times it's they're buying a business because it works, it's synergistic with what they already have, and the property just doesn't form a part of that, so they don't want it. So then you get to this crossroads of, well, exactly what are the plans for that property? And if it does need to be extracted, it's not as simple, as we'll go on to discuss in greater depth, as just transferring it out to the shareholders. There are a lot of implications to exactly how you do it. You don't want there to be tax issues, really, and insolvency issues. It's something that requires consideration, maybe as early as possible, maybe a little bit later, as we'll come on to.
Perfect. So we have some things that we're going to walk you through. So Andrew's going to walk us through some of the ways that we can extract a property. So tell us, there's about 4 that we've come up with. So let's start down the first path.
Yeah, so I've come up with sort of 4 in principle, but there are a few more ways, and some of these are variants of one way or the other. But first one is obviously making a dividend, essentially, of the property to the shareholders. So rather than doing a cash dividend, the company pays out a dividend to each of its shareholders of the property itself. The issue with that is that you potentially got a massive tax issue, because they're going to have to pay income tax or dividend tax rates.
Because if it's a £300,000 property and they're going to dividend it out, they're going to have 2 £150,000 dividend payments plus their income plus everything else that's happened that year. So we have to watch out for things like that.
Yeah, because it is something that has value. So you can't just, even if it's something that you're just moving to one side, it is intrinsically valuable. So bear that in mind.
So the taxman's going to want their cut.
Mm-hmm.
The other option is simply a pre-completion purchase for cash. Now, obviously, the issue with that is that the seller's going to have to dip into their pockets and find the cash to put into the company.
So this is if you and I are purchasing a company or we're selling the company, we're going to have to go into our personal bank accounts, put $150,000 in each to buy this £300,000 property.
Exactly.
Okay. And most people, when they're getting ready to retire, aren't looking to, or sell their company, aren't looking to spend a lot of money then to extract money.
I mean, it's still an option in that, provided they pay the market value for it, which we'll come on to. If the deal is on the basis of cash-free, debt-free, which we'll do another podcast on, they could get the cash back out as part of the deal itself. But the other issue is, one, if they're not paying the market value, the revenue can still look at it and say it's actually a dividend because you didn't pay its full whack. the other issue is if the company went under in 2 years, and when you're with a buyer that you don't know who they are and they run down the company, it's potentially reviewable by the insolvency practitioner, and they could look to come after the former directors or shareholders for the property.
Well, that wouldn't be any fun. So
No.
we want to make sure we get around those
So that's
things.
why we will say post-completion is always a better route.
So post-completion purchase.
So this would be obviously the preferred option from our perspective. That happens immediately post-completion. The buyer comes in, buys the company with the property, and then immediately on completion or shortly after completion, the sellers acquire the property from the company.
So we receive our £1 million each, and then you and I buy the company or the property at 150 grand each of our £1 million that we've received to our pockets.
Yes.
Okay.
I think that's a lot cleaner, really, in a lot of the different methods of doing it. More of a paper exercise than anything else.
And then, but there's some things we could do. There's one thing that kind of that twist that we can do ahead of time.
So you could always look at doing a company reorganization. I don't want to get into the nitty gritty of it, but it's always an option to have in the back pocket. That's at a stage where you haven't gone to market, so that might be real sort of forward planning. There are some issues with that as well. In that a buyer, you don't know what a buyer may want. So the buyer might want to buy the property with the company. So, but it's always something which is in there in the back pocket.
But if you plan that ahead of time, you can probably go either way, can't you? Or you can get rid of the property afterwards or sell it alongside.
Yeah.
So there's ways to get around that even if you've reorganized.
Yeah, I suppose the issue might be from a tax perspective, whether if you sold the property alongside it, whether you'd be able to get entrepreneurs relief on the gain, which I don't think you would be able to.
Cool. So now, we've looked at 4 different ways. Now, how could it be funded? How could you pay for it?
So this is the thing that's always the issue with property extraction. So when I say buy the property with completion, the buyer needs to pay for the value of the property because it's sitting there on the balance sheet. The company's worth what the business is worth plus the property while it's still in the company. So it's important that they pay consideration for it. There's a number of ways you can do this. They can simply pay the additional cash, which is then netted off at completion and immediately paid back to the company. So in effect, it's cash neutral because the buyer's not actually not lost any money,
Okay.
because it gets it straight back. But the issue with that is the buyer might say, we haven't got an extra 300 grand, what have you, to go to fund a property. The other option is this is one we've used before. The sellers use the cash which they've received on completion to buy the property from the company.
Okay.
So essentially they pay the cash back to the company. The company loans that cash that's just paid back to the buyer, and the buyer pays it back to the sellers as a deferred payment. So it forms part of the consideration, but the money sort of runs through the company. So it's still a neat cash transaction. And the other one is that the sellers could acquire the property but leave the money outstanding, and basically you add the value of the loan to the deal price and then offset it by settling the loan. So it's essentially a director's loan, which then is offset at completion by deducting it from the completion monies.
Very good. So, but it sounds very technical.
It's very technical. I'm trying not to get too technical.
You're not getting technical. It's good, but just things that people need to think about. Extract it ahead of time, extract it afterwards.
Yeah.
Making sure that there's cash available, buying it after the fact. So there's all sorts of different ways to do it, but we've run into it, and probably each one of the ways we've done it has been a different way.
Yeah.
Each one of the last 4 has been a different way.
Exactly. And I mean, these ones I've said, they're not by no means the end of the story. There are other options you can consider, but these are just...
Yeah, I think with all the different options, there's different levels of complexity, really, sort of between them all. You just have to make sure that the paperwork is quite clear and exactly the methodology that you've chosen. So there's no confusion as you go along. That's what I would recommend.
But we also want to make sure that, and this is one of the things that we always make sure we're working with the brokers, with the accountants, and with us and the buyer and seller, and whichever side of the transaction we're on, to make sure that it comes up clean. So there's some things that your team has to consider, Callum. So what are those?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously Andrew just had a little list of the different ways you could do it. If you know which way that you are going to suggest it goes, and you think the buyers are amenable to that as well, maybe put it in the heads of term ahead of time, just so that everyone is in agreement exactly how we do this, and then negotiation could just follow on from that. I mean, if it's not been agreed, then you can perhaps leave it silent at the very beginning of the transaction. Just make it clear that there's going to be further conversations. I think this is what we talked about in our last podcast as well, just communications and remaining open and flexible. Either way, I think one of the things that your team can help with is just making sure that it's not one of those issues that's left until too late in the transaction, because it can be a problem then.
We want to make sure that we're communicating, and also the position when we set out. If you'd like to keep the property, then let's set that out at the beginning. If it's in a pension or something like that, you want to make sure that it's accounted for as we're going in.
Yeah.
But when we look at all that stuff, and obviously we're on the legal side of this, so you're always going to want to seek tax advice. But there's some tax issues that we're going to come into, Andrew. So could you walk us through a couple of things that you're going to have to consider in all parts of the transaction, but especially when it comes to the property?
Sure. So obviously when someone acquires property, they'll have to pay stamp duty, land tax, SDLT on that. So that if your sellers, for example, your clients are buying the property, that's going to be an additional tax that they're going to have to pay. Mm-hmm. Also, if the company sells the property and makes a gain on it, or increases the overall gain for the year of the company, that's going to potentially give rise to a corporation tax charge. Yes. And also, the question is whether there's been an option to tax on the property, and it's going to mean the transaction subject to VAT, which the company would then have to pay over to the revenue. So you'd have to factor that in if you were to deduct it from the deal value. And obviously, if they're buying the company with the property in it and paying the value of the property, that's going to potentially increase the stamp duty on the shares.
Yeah. So essentially, a lot of different ways in which accountant input is fundamental, really, throughout this process, no matter what option is chosen.
Yeah, I mean, I'd probably scratched the surface there.
But we wanted to give you some tasters and some tidbits. We didn't want to give you everything about it, but some things you could think of. If there's a property in the transaction, we wanted to make sure you had some tools to work with there to make sure that you were talking to the clients ahead of time, talking to the sellers ahead of time to make sure they understood what their goal is with the property. Is it part of their pension pot? Is it something they wanted to keep? Do they believe that it's essential to the business? And then what happens if the buyer says it's not?
Yeah.
So we want to be prepared ahead of time so that the whole team is speaking and communicating with what the plan is and the strategy is. So hopefully that's been able to help you a little bit with extracting a property. So one of the 4.5 P's that we've talked about. So we talked about the property factor there. If you want any more information, you can contact us, and we'd love to talk to you. Thank you very much for listening to Legal Survival.
Thank you very much.
Hope you have more tools than an SAS survival specialist when it comes to your company's sale or purchase. If you still need more help, get in touch with the team at Continuum Lawyers. Email us on info@continuumlawyers.com. or visit the website at allthews and continuumlawyers.com. Continuum with 2 U's. Our clients walk in business owners and walk out wealthier.